Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Aman. I am the Collaborations Manager at the Initiative for Strategic Litigation in Africa, which is a Pan-African feminist organization based in Johannesburg, South Africa. Thank you for the opportunity to speak about the Post with Purpose campaign and the recent developments surrounding the African Union Convention on Ending Violence Against Women and Girls, the AUCVOC. Let me begin by clarifying that the Post for Purpose campaign is not opposed to a continental convention on ending violence against women and girls. We fully support decisive African action to prevent violence, protect survivors, and hold perpetrators and states accountable, as well as providing effective remedies to survivors. The Post for Purpose campaign is a call to all stakeholders to pause, critically analyze the convention and end violence against women and girls, in order to form a view on whether the convention is fit for purpose. We believe that instead of investing time and resources in pursuing ratification of the convention, it is important to pause, reflect, and analyze the convention, to consult widely, to seek accountability, and learn the lessons needed to ensure Africa ends up with a convention that is capable of achieving its objectives. Pause for Purpose invites all stakeholders, including civil society, governments, development partners, activists, and human rights defenders, to pause and reflect in order to prioritize the need for a convention that is fit for purpose and that will create an enabling legal normative framework informed by the lived realities of African women and girls, rather than pursuing symbolic ratification for its own sake. That is why our message is simple and very clear. Pause, listen, strengthen, then ratify. There is no contradiction between urgency and due diligence. Violence against women and girls demands urgent action. But urgency cannot and should not justify lowering legal standards. A treaty is legally binding. Once ratified, it will influence national legislation, public policy, court decisions, as well as state reporting, and the remedies that are available for survivors for generations to come. We must therefore ask ourselves, does the present text of the AUCVOG strengthens the protections African women have already secured, particularly through the Maputo Protocol, or does it introduce ambiguity and regression into an area where the law must be and should be very, very clear? Our legal assessment as the Post for Purpose campaign has identified concerns at 3 levels. First, there are serious concerns about the process through which the convention was developed. Many women rights organizations, as well as survivors and civil society organizations, were not meaningfully consulted on the actual draft text of the convention. In a campaign survey that was conducted by the Post for Purpose campaign of approximately 1,500 civil society organizations, only 33% were aware that the convention was being drafted before its adoption, while 93% reported that they had not been consulted. Consultation, therefore, must be more than an invitation to endorse a predetermined outcome. It must give women and girls a genuine opportunity to examine the text, raise concerns, and influence the final instrument. A treaty concerning African women cannot be developed without African women. Secondly, the convention raises substantive legal concerns. It does not consistently articulate protections as enforceable rights matched by clear state obligations. Several important matters and issues within the convention are framed as objectives or principles rather than legal entitlements. The convention also fails to establish a sufficiently strong anti-discrimination framework, even though we know that through gender-based discrimination and structural inequality, they are among the root causes of violence against women and girls. The convention does not adequately address several realities facing African women and girls. These include female genital mutilation, child marriage, domestic violence, marital rape, trafficking, and conflict-related sexual violence, all of these issues are not covered within the convention. While emerging forms of violence are mentioned within the convention, such as femicide and violence within the cyberspace, these definitions and they lack corresponding obligations within the convention. At the same time, we see that the language concerning the family and African values also require careful scrutiny. Without legal clarity, such language, as we have seen within the convention, can easily be used by anti-rights actors to justify practices that restrict women's autonomy or expose women and girls to violence. The Maputo Protocol already provides strong and explicit protections in several of these areas. A new treaty that therefore must build upon that foundation. It must not weaken or confuse or retreat from standards African women have fought so hard to establish. Thirdly, the Post for Purpose campaign have also raised concerns around implementation, monitoring, and accountability. From our point of view, a treaty must clearly identify what states are required to do, how compliance will be assessed, and what remedies are available when states fail to meet their obligations. Good intentions and aspirational language are not enough. While some have argued that weaknesses within the convention can be corrected after ratification through general comments, guidelines, or litigation, this is not a correct answer. Soft law guidance cannot repair defects in a binding treaty. Litigation, for example, is quite expensive. It is slow, and it is also inaccessible by many survivors. Amending a treaty after ratification is also politically and procedurally difficult. So the safest option, and this is what we are calling for within the Post for Purpose campaign, is the most responsible approach, which is to correct the text of the convention before states become legally bound by it. This brings me to the development that took place on the 25th of July at the Pan-African Parliament. The Pan-African Parliament, the African Union Commission, UNEFPA, and other stakeholders convened a high-level parliamentary and multi-stakeholder dialogue in Midrand, South Africa, on the domestication and ratification of AU CVOC, the convention. And according to Pan-African Parliament's own account, the dialogue was intended to strengthen political commitment and accelerate the signature, ratification, and domestication, as well as implementation of the convention. The Parliament reported that the Gambia had been the first country to ratify it, and it called on member states to expedite ratification as well as, to follow lead of the Gambia. The discussions focused on a continental ratification roadmap and the role of parliamentarians in accelerating ratification and domestication. So because of the fact that at the Post for Purpose campaign, we came to notice that this kind of engagement will present one view around the convention. The Post for Purpose campaign, as well as concerned civil society organizations, African feminists, survivors, as well as women rights organizations, came together in a peaceful protest before the Pan-African Parliament. The protest was important because it made it visible that the voices of those who were not adequately reflected in the official framing of the high-level dialogue should be taken into consideration. The protest was not to reject action against ending violence against women and girls. It was to demand better action, better protections, better convention. The protest was also kind of like putting forward a very important message that we would want the Pan-African Parliament, we would want AU member states to pause, to listen, to strengthen, and then to ratify. So it was very clear from the outset that this protest was not against the AU Convention on Ending Violence Against Women and Girls. The requests that were presented at the Pan-African Parliament, to the Pan-African Parliament and to the AU member states remained very clear and consistent. First, that the Pan-African Parliament must ensure balance in the voices addressing parliamentarians and member states. If those who are advocating for immediate ratification are given high-level platforms, then at the same time, women movement survivors and legal experts calling for a pause must receive an equal and meaningful opportunity to be heard. Second, the Pan-African Parliament should transmit the Pause for Purpose memorandum, which was submitted and received by the Pan-African Parliament representatives on the 25th of July, namely it was delivered to the Legal Counsel of the Pan-African Parliament, as well as the chairperson of the Justice and Human Rights Committee. And the request was that this memorandum needs to be transmitted to the African Union member states, the African Union Commission, the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, as well as to the AU Special Envoy on Women, Peace and Security in Addis. Third, that member states should pause further ratification of the convention and allow some time for an independent and transparent and technically rigorous review of the convention to be undertaken. We have made clear that such review must be an independent and expert-based review of the convention. Finally, that the African Union should initiate an inclusive revision process to align the convention with the Maputo Protocol, as well as to international standards that AU member states are legally binded by, and a treaty that really reflects the lived realities of African women and girls. Again, this is not a call to delay without purpose. It is a call for due diligence, accountability, and stronger protections. African women deserve more than symbolic treaty. They deserve a convention that clearly names the violence they experience, creates enforceable obligations, a treaty that provides effective accountability and strengthens the legal protections already secured. African women are speaking, Parliament and member states must listen. The message remains the same. We pause today, we protect tomorrow. We need to pause, listen, strengthen, then ratify. Thank you so much for the opportunity.